Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Richmond's Community Grants Information Session. My name is Eva Colin. I serve as a Senior Policy Advisor in the city. I oversee the city's Office of Children and Families, and I am one of members of a team that supports the community grants, otherwise known as the non-departmental funding process. For those of you who are his current or past grantees, I know you'll know that you work closely with LaSharn Benton, who's on the call today. LaSharn, give a wave. Dominic Barrett is also here from Human Services, and he's also on this team of folks who collaborates to support this process. Not with us today, but will also be a point of contact for you is a woman named Daphne Bolotas, and she is going to be your go-to during the application process if you have questions. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but we will go ahead and get started. What I want to make sure we see is the agenda first. So we're going to run through some logistics in a second, and then we'll run into the introduction to the grant funding process. We'll talk about the timeline, the application overview, and kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the application. And then we'll turn into Q&A. And then finally, we'll share some resources, including some helpful links and Daphne's contact information so that you can have questions answered ongoing through the application process. So logistics for today, you are muted right now. And that's just for the ease and for the order of the session. And I also want to flag that chat is disabled. That is not the most convenient thing, but it is a city policy. So in lieu of chat, please hold your questions until the end. And then during question and answer, you can raise your hand and we will then be able to bring you off mute to answer your questions directly. And the session is being recorded right now, and it will be available to download later. So first, let's just talk about the community grant process. So community grants are also known as our non-departmental funding for the city. It's in our city. Oh, yes.
Sorry, this is Kiera. I still see the title page of the presentation.
Interesting. Well, thank you. That is supposed to be progressing. Well, you all, I need to find a different way to share this information. 1 second. Thank you so much.
Did it shift just now?
It has shifted.
I don't see it at all.
Can folks see agenda now?
Okay, I'm gonna log off.
Still the title page.
Yeah, I can see that it's progressing, but there's a different way for me to share this, and I'm just going to share it differently. So I'm going to, apologies for the technical difficulties all. I got ahead of my skis trying to be a little bit more tech savvy than I think I actually am. So let me pause this. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to do a different view. So you should, all the sharing is stopped, and now I'm going to share just this file. There we go. Dominic, are you able to see my screen now?
I can, yeah. Can others?
Okay, great. So I think we should be good now. We're going to go ahead and do it this way. It's not as clean of a view, but I think it'll still achieve our goal. So we'll go from here. All right, so let me jump ahead. So we went through agenda that I read to you, but now you can look at it. And then we're going to jump into the introduction to the grant funding process. We talked about logistics. We're going to talk about the grant funding process now. So community grants are what we call, as the kind of the lay people way of describing what we call our non-departmental funding through the city budget. The city every year goes through an annual budget process that begins in March and then culminates usually in May, and then in order to inform the city's funding priorities. City agencies and departments are funded. Our community grants are called non-departmental because by funding community organizations, we're not funding departments. So it's a whole category that's named that, but it's a little bit easier to just say community grants. These are one-year grants that are available to eligible charitable organizations to address unmet critical needs in the city of Richmond. There are a few public sector and quasi-governmental agencies that receive non-departmental funds as well, who are not under the purview of the city of Richmond, but are still funded and support public good in the city. When we talk about eligible charitable organizations, I want to be very clear that that is something that is not up to our control. We don't have discretion over that. That's established by city code, and the city attorney oversees that. So we will, in the application process, which we get to in a second, we'll be looking for that proof of eligibility, charitable organization, whether 501c3 or otherwise, but we will need verification that your organization is eligible to receive non-departmental funding, and that means it is a nonprofit charitable organization. If you're not one of these public sector partners that also receives non-departmental funds. Grants are made as invoice-based reimbursements. Typically, there might be a couple cases where there are exceptions to that rule, but they're based on contracts between the grantee and the city of Richmond. So the application informs the budget, and then once those applicants are narrowed down to awardees, once we decide who's going to receive non-departmental grants, and they're in the budget that is then approved by city council, once the fiscal year begins, the grantee, if you are awarded funding, will work with LaSharn. That's when LaSharn jumps back into the picture now. So LaSharn's not going to be involved in fielding questions about the application. That'll be Daphne. We'll talk about that in a minute. But once you become a grantee, you'll then be working with LaSharn to finalize this contract. That contract will be based on the application that you submitted, and will glean out what your scopes of service will be for the course of the year that you receive city funding. And then you will sign it, city will sign it, and you will then be in a grant contract with the city of Richmond. The priority funding areas for non-departmental grants are children, youth, and education, housing, human services and health, and arts and culture. We'll talk about each of those a little bit more depth shortly. Applications are due, and I think I might say this a couple times over the course of today, so just bear with me, but I just want to make sure nobody gets this wrong. By 4 p.m. on Friday, December 16th. And those applications will then be reviewed in January, and accepted applicants will be notified in March, and they will be included in Mayor Stoney's budget that will be presented to City Council in early March 2023. Once Mayor Stoney presents that budget, City Council will deliberate on the budget. And so it will go through a process, and usually the non-departmental budget is fairly straightforward, but there may be a case where if you are awarded in Mayor Stoney's budget, there might be a situation where whether it's LaSharn or Dominic or even me might call and say, hey, you know, City Council is interested in hearing more about the non-departmental grants that are in the budget. Would you mind coming to City Council and presenting on your funding area or your application? We would work closely with you to prepare you for that. We wouldn't ask you to come in cold. We'd make sure that we would introduce your organization, et cetera. I just want to name that when we call you and say, congratulations, we accepted your application and we put you into the budget proposal, that doesn't necessarily mean we're across the finish line. The finish line is once City Council votes on that budget, which is fine, usually happens by the end of May. And then that budget will go into effect July 1, 2023, which is the first day of the city's fiscal year 2024. And then from that point, that's the start date for when you'll start working with LaSharn to be able to finalize that grant contract under the oversight of the city attorney. In terms of the application, want to make sure we articulate that there are two different ways to submit an application this year. If you're currently a grantee receiving non-departmental funding, you're in our budget right now, you have an open contract with LaSharn or an executed contract with LaSharn, and you are working towards your scope of service, and you're seeking funding for the same program, you may complete an addendum. That's a abbreviated application form. It's an addendum to the application. If you are not currently a grantee, even if you received funding from us in the past, like if you were a grantee in FY20 or fiscal year 20, but haven't gotten funding for a couple of years and then want to apply for funding again this year, you will need to complete a full application. The addendum essentially is an attachment to the current grant contract. It's really only available to those folks who are currently in contract with the city for non-departmental funding. If you are a current grantee who wants to change what program is being funded by the city, or you want to add a program to what your current funding, you need to complete an application for any new programs or any new funded activities for the city. Again, I just want to reiterate, the addendum is only available to those folks who are currently funded, who are seeking funding for the same programs. So it's just kind of We're asking for an extension on your funding and your contract. Completed applications or addenda need to be submitted by 4 p.m. on December 16th. And that is not a full sentence, but it was supposed to say should be submitted by email by 4 p.m. on December 16th. Late submissions will not be accepted. Applications or addenda should be emailed to budgetndrequests@rva.gov in a single file to the extent that that's possible. If you submit electronically, you will receive a confirmation email if your submission was successful. So if you submit electronically, you send that email and you do not receive a confirmation email, please use the backup option of printing your application out and bringing it to City Hall and putting it in our Dropbox in the lobby, which will be available starting Monday, December 12th, until December 16th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. When you enter City Hall, the entrance to City Hall is currently on 9th Street. You'll go through security, and the folks at the information desk, LaShawn, that the box will be with the information desk, right? Like they can just walk right up and say, here's my file to drop in.
Well, last year we put it like at the front where the ambassadors used to sit with that closed, so keep the flow. But we will decide where we're going to move it, put it on Monday. So yeah, security will be able to direct them.
That's what I was going to get at. Anyone you interact with from City Hall, if you're saying you're looking for the community grants or the non-departmental Dropbox, they will know where that is. So if you are unable to successfully submit this by email, you have this option, and we encourage you to use it because like last year, I think LaShawn was sharing with me, a number of people thought that they'd submitted, but didn't realize they were supposed to get a confirmation email and then didn't realize they had not submitted. But since we don't accept late submissions, it's really important that we make sure that you know that you can submit this in hard copy if necessary. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our priority areas, including a couple like idiosyncrasies about a couple of them as we walk through this. So one of our priority areas is children, youth, and education. If you're applying for this category, your proposal, your work should really fit within the range of activities that are described here. Early childhood care and education. This can include childcare or preschool programs, like an actual enrolled childcare or preschool program, or it can be programs for children under age 5. Out of school time activities, whether after school, on weekends, or during the summer. In-school support services that address holistic needs of families that are not addressed by a school system, but can be delivered during the school day, that either serve the broader need of the family or may advance academic goals. And then services that provide mentorship, apprenticeships, or connect secondary students to career and college pathways. The one thing I want to name about the first piece, the early childhood care and education category that I forgot to mention, is that if your proposal is to support parents of very young children, like children under 5, that's also an eligible category, an eligible funding area in this category of early childhood. But I want to note that if you're applying for school-aged funding, especially if you're applying for funding that would, require that you operate within the school or during the school day, but really for any program in which you're saying that you're supporting RPS's goals, you must include a letter of support from Superintendent Camrus or a designee. The superintendent's team is aware of this expectation and requirement, but this is really our effort to make sure that RPS and their needs are considered as we go through our grant process. There are many incredible programs across the city that are not actually working directly with schools, and we recognize that might be a barrier, but at the same time, we are committed to making sure that we're in alignment with RPS's strategic plans. And so a letter from the superintendent will be that verification for us. The second priority area is housing, human services, and health. To apply for this category, your work should fit within the following range of activities: homelessness prevention or services for the unhoused or housing insecure, services for seniors and older adults, health services for specifically marginalized populations who require targeted outreach or care, promotion of community health and quality of life, particularly through services targeting low-income residents or communities, and workforce development are all in this category. And I want to note the workforce development and kind of that post-secondary component of education kind of overlap. So you're not going to be dinged if you don't overthink this. Like, choose the one that makes the most sense. If you're supporting 19-year-olds who are just out of high school, yeah, it technically is about, that post-secondary piece, but it's also workforce development. The folks who are reviewing your applications we're all humans. It's not a computer that's going to go through and immediately like, toss people into a discard pile. So we will be able to kind of fit things together and make sure that we've reflected the right scope of work. But just don't, all it is to say, every year we get questions from folks who are anxious that they're checking the wrong box. Don't overthink it. We understand that some of these delineations are a little fuzzy and there's a lot of gray area. So we understand that. The final priority area that we'll discuss today is arts and culture. And for this category, your work should fit within the following: supports for a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive community that uses visual arts, music, dance, theater, and or other cultural activities to help build a connected, inclusive One Richmond. Services that expand access to arts and culture and build cultural equity. And arts programming for neighborhood vitality. And this is just a note on the public sector and quasi-governmental organizations. We do regularly make financial contributions to partner associations and regional entities that provide public goods and services for the city and the region. There is a distinct template. If you are on the call and you're going to be applying for this, there's a distinct template for you to follow, and that's attachment E. We're going to get to the links in a second, but just so you know, don't apply using the general fund application. Make sure the basic one, use attachment E. This is so that you're able to provide the qualifying information that's necessary at the same level of detail that other public sector city agencies provide when they prepare their budgets. This helps us on the city side to understand really what your goals are and the needs are of partner government agencies. For those of you from charitable nonprofit organizations, just to make meaning of this, we're talking about agencies that are public but aren't like managed by city council and the mayor. And that's like the ambulance authority. That's like the health district, Richmond Behavioral Health Authority. Those types of larger, they are government, but they are not local city of Richmond government. If you are in that category, make sure you're applying this way. The reason why we ask for this is that so that we can compare your budget alongside other city agencies when we are when the city is reviewing this. I also want to note that LaSharn, Dominic, and I, and Daphne, who's not with us today, but is part of our internal non-departmental team, we're in the human services team. We are not reviewing the public sector grants. We collect them and then they get routed to the chief administrative officer's team, and they do that review. But spent more time than I wished on that component, but we'll move on. With your application, you will be expected to submit a project budget proposal as part of your application to receive funding. This is the same information that we've shared with folks for the past 2 years, so we're not teaching you anything new today. This is also all delineated in your application form, so just want to make sure, folks, we're not changing anything up on you. It must include any personnel costs, and this should include the total cost of each staff person who will work on the project, the percentage of time that they'll be working on the overall project, and the sources and amount of funding that would be used to compensate them for their work on the project. We cannot, City of Richmond will not be the only source of funding for salaries and benefits. There are many, many reasons for this, but the most important one is that we do this usually on a reimbursement basis. And if you are hiring somebody to complete a scope of work that we're going to reimburse you for, you probably ought to have a different source of funding to make sure you can pay them before you receive our reimbursement. And for those of you who've worked with us for a while, you know that these processes can take a little while. And so we certainly don't want to hold anybody up as we proceed. So this is not us just being finicky. It's not like this is an invalid cost area. It's a legal thing we can pay for. We just don't have a system that would allow us to pay you proactively for a person that would be required to complete the project. So just to delineate, if your budget includes the full salary of a person, it will not be eligible for funding from the city. Just want to make sure that's super clear. But supplies and materials, absolutely. Office supplies, tools, etc. Overhead costs, the cost of funds involved in running your program or your operation. So if you are a nonprofit organization and you are applying for a specific program, it is okay for your project budget to include some overhead. Like if you are going to use a percentage of your grant to be able to afford, mail, okay, that's fine. We just need to be able to see that all laid out. And this is a sample budget. Again, this is literally the exact same thing we've used for the past 2 years, not new information. This would be an organization that's applying to do after school tutoring. You'll see here under the personnel category, let me see if I can highlight that, but you've got the cost purpose, we're looking, how many tutors, how many hours a day, and how many days total in your proposed application are you in your project, are you going to be employing them? And then the total cost to your organization. We are looking for your total request as well as other sources. It's really important to us that we see a diversified funding base because, like I said, we're reimbursement based. So if your entire project is reliant on our money, it's going to be hard for you to get going if we're your only source of funding. So that's why we have this column of total request and other sources. So your total request in this application is $5,000. And then you're telling us that $20,000 is committed from XYZ Foundation and $20,000 is already committed from the ABC Foundation. And then you add a description. You say non-departmental funds will support active tutoring by 15 tutors over 100 school days at an average of 2 hours per day. 100% of their time will be dedicated to this project, and these tutors will be available at no cost to students. And so that's an example of personnel. That's project specific. The other example of personnel we have is executive director. That executive director is going to be in the organization whether or not the tutoring project is funded. And so we'll look at, again, made up the numbers. I hope, this is just made up, but $45,000 is the total cost of the organization. The total request is $4,500, and the remainder is committed by these two organizations, these foundations that we made up. The description is that 10% of the executive director's time will be spent supervising this project. So that's why you've asked for 10% of their total salary to be covered by this grant. Supplies and materials that are down here. Again, these are two different examples of types of supplies and materials, whether it's office supplies or operating expenses. Okay, go to the next page. I'm not going to read all of this out to everybody. All of this is in the grant application materials, but this is the project and description of impact. When you complete this portion of the application, we want you to think through the following questions. And a lot, basically just be thoughtful about how your project is meeting unmet needs in the city of Richmond. Help us and the folks who are on the review team understand why what needs are unmet and how they are unmet. And align them to stated goals and expectations of the city. The priority areas are listed. The city council and mayor have also published an equity agenda in the past few years. And so there are other ways to identify things that are priorities for the city. And we just want to make sure that you're able to articulate how your project or proposal aligns with what city leadership has articulated as what we are working on as a city. We really do see our non-departmental grantees, the organizations who receive funding in this way, as our partners in achieving this work. We have very big, broad goals for our residents, and only some of those goals are achievable with city staff. We rely heavily on the partnership of community organizations to achieve our vision for, a thriving Richmond. And so it's important to us that as you apply, you show us how you are in alignment with those visions and goals. We also, as you'll see through here, we want to know how you engage stakeholders, how you include diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, and certainly representation of City of Richmond residents who would benefit from your program. So we want to make sure you're in connection and in conversation with the communities that you intend to serve. And finally, we definitely want to see how you've demonstrated success. Non-departmental grants typically are awarded to organizations that have a track record of achieving outcomes for the projects for which they're seeking funding. In occasional cases, that's not true. There are some exceptions, but most often our grants are for projects that can show that they've been successful in the past. And so it's going to be really important that you articulate to us if you have a track record, what that track record is, and how you know that it's been successful, and how our investment will be a good use of taxpayer money. And then if this is one of those exceptions where you have a new project, broadly speaking, we don't encourage lots of new projects because there's a much lower likelihood of being funded. But if you've got an idea that you really want to apply for, make sure you're able to articulate why you're confident it will be successful in Richmond. It's very hard. I just want to be very honest. It's very hard to make a case to invest taxpayer dollars into kind of new ideas on the community grant side. We've had mixed results in the past working with council and city leadership on that. So if you do have a new idea, show us why you're confident that it's a good use of taxpayer money, and we will review it, and the team will review it with generosity of spirit and enthusiasm. But I just want to name for those of you on the call today, less likelihood of funding than if you have a track record of success. The checklist that's in the application packet is important to review as well, so that you have a good sense of like what we're looking to see. If you don't have a project budget, unfortunately, we will not review your application. So if there's no project budget, that is going into a pile of like and we're not going to review the application if there's no budget there. These attachments that are listed, they're not all required, but the more the merrier. The more that you're able to show, the better. Certain things like your tax exempt certification, like we really do need to see that because we need to see that you're a charitable organization. We are looking for 990s so that we can see, kind of your standing with the IRS. If you have financial statements from the previous fiscal year, any audit materials or financial statements, we appreciate seeing those. Anything we can do to be able to convey that you are a good and credible organization that will make good use of city funding allows us to make a stronger case for funding your organization. Some of these are not as important as others, but I do want to name that one topic that comes up. People often ask what I mean by this, but site control building or zoning determination. We actually need to know that you're allowed to run the program that you want to run in the place where you're running it. And so if it is that you're going to run an after-school program in a school, we actually need to know that the school has given you permission to do that. If you are running a childcare in your home, if you're a family day home that's running childcare in your where you live, we're going to want to see that you're allowed to do that, right? That you like have that your license, that you have the permission from VSS to run that childcare. And that you have the appropriate like business license as well. So we want to that's that question. This is not like a random extended list, but really we want to make sure we're funding people who are above board, that everybody's got everything in line, and that we're not giving funding to an organization that we then find out is like, not allowed to be in the building where they are or aren't allowed to do the specific program that they're doing in that space. And we rely on you to share that with us proactively because we don't have the capacity or resources to check on all of that. That would be a lot of research on our part. Evaluation. Each proposal will be evaluated by relevant city staff to determine its compatibility with the identified priority areas. So Dominic, LaShawn, and me, we're all part of this team, but we also have other members of city staff who participate in review. And we bring people in who have experience and expertise with the priority areas that are on the table. So if you're submitting a proposal around a service for the unhoused in Richmond, we'll knock on Diane Wilmore's door and ask her, who's our homelessness liaison, to sit down with us and review the applications because she knows that content area better than anybody else. And then examples of those evaluation sheets are in the application guideline document. And LaShawn says this every year, but like take the time to evaluate your own application, like get a sense of where you stand. And aim to what's the number, LaShawn, that you say you want people to like try to aim for?
75.
Like 75. If you can't get 75, maybe go back and revise your application.
Exactly. And Eva, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Also, when they evaluate themselves, I also recommend, and it helped last time, to get someone else to look at their application and let them evaluate it because it's hard for the potential grantees to evaluate themselves. They're going to say, yep. They think they score 80, but you might give it to someone else. And they're like, well, you forgot this and that. So I would recommend someone else, on your team to evaluate it, not the person preparing the application, because it is missed. But 75 is a minimum that you have to hit before we even it goes forward.
Yeah, it's a good idea to have. I mean, to that note, like anybody who's on your board of directors, somebody like that's probably a good person to have review it, since they are, one of your fiduciary. You rely on them for fiduciary responsibility. And we want to note that the 75 is it's not a formal cutoff, but every year we have more applications that exceed 75 than we can fund. So it's not a cutoff, but like being able to get to 75 is a good thing you should feel good about before you submit, because every year we have more applications than we have funding that exceed that 75% score, or that 75 score. And then this is also, you must meet all of these criteria. This is in attachment C, and I just want to call this out. If you are a nonprofit organization, you have to have the appropriate certification approved by the federal government. You must be in compliance with all federal, state, and local regulations and has no outstanding violations, taxes, or penalties. Our city attorney does review the SCC database to ensure that you're in compliance and you're up to date. And all these other pieces, whether violations or taxes, like we'll find out. Like, you know, it's part of the process, and we will not be able to make grants to organizations that are not in compliance. We also want to make sure that you have a well-developed organizational structure. If you are a nonprofit, you must have an active board. Number 4 is you must agree to coordinate your projects with the appropriate, NIV is an outdated term. We need to fix that. But the appropriate partnership or civic groups, business associate organizations, or city departments. And ultimately what that means is that, at least on our end, and if you're applying, for instance, if you're applying for funding for early childhood and let's say you run a preschool and you are applying for funding for your preschool program, we're asking that you agree to work with my Office of Children and Families on our broader work to support early childhood development in Richmond. And that, you know, when we call you and say, hey, you know, we have a survey that we want, you know, folks who are running preschool programs to complete, we're hoping that you'll say, like, enthusiastically, absolutely, yes, can't wait to do that with you. So that's where that comes in. This is not obligating you to anything. Of course, if I make that phone call to you and you're like, no, I will be disappointed, but there's no like legal binding to that. It's just an expectation that you're willing to be a full-fledged partner of the city, not just receive city dollars to execute a program. And then finally, you're asked to disclose any lawsuits to which you've been a party in the last 3 years, as well as any pending lawsuits at time of application. These are not disqualifying, but they will call for additional review. All right, and then before we turn to Q&A, actually, we'll turn to Q&A now. That slide has disappeared apparently, but I'm going to pause. I'm just going to create a new slide. Or no, never mind. We'll just pause there. If you have questions, please use the reactions tab to raise your hand, and we will bring you off mute as you go. Okay, our first question. Oh, let me see. We've got a question from Lynn Bivens. I'm going to allow the mic to you, Lynn. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Let me give you the ability to. All right, you are able to bring yourself off mute, Lynn, and ask your question. But you're going to have to click the mic button at the top to make sure you're off mute.
Thank you, Eva. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I did take the opportunity to read the guidelines before this call, and the organization that I work for, the Partnership for Housing Affordability, we are funded now for our housing resource line, and the guidelines for this year talk about homeless and homeless services, and the slide says it is slightly differently worded. It says homeless prevention and services for the housing insecure. So either one would apply to us, but the reference to the housing insecure I kind of like better. So I didn't know whether the slides, which one, how to make the case in the proposal.
Thank you so much for asking that question. And I think that there may be other folks on the line who have a similar question. For full transparency, we're in the process. We've been undergoing a revision process to this application over time, and we have, in this case, absolutely overlooked an important detail in our guidelines. Affordable housing is absolutely a priority of the city. We've talked about it a lot. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, if you can point to anything the city has said in the past few years as just to identify this as something that's a priority within the priority areas, that makes the case. And so, Lynn, I think in this case, you know, given the work that Partnership for Housing Affordability does, given the mayor's commitment to affordable housing and expanding affordable housing stock in Richmond and helping navigate folks, the housing insecure, to permanent housing, absolutely eligible. If you have specific questions, we'll just put that up on the screen now, which is Daphne Bolitas is our point of contact for questions on an ongoing basis. But big picture, affordable housing is absolutely an eligible, like, support for folks accessing affordable housing is absolutely an eligible area. And housing insecure is the language we've been trying to move towards. And if we've missed that, that is on us. But thank you for naming that for us.
Thank you.
And just if it wasn't clear, we won't be penalizing anyone if they use one keyword versus, the other, so long as the broader context is there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so I am going to, Lynn, disable your mic now. And then Mary, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to allow your mic. You can come off mute and ask your question. Mary Malpai. I think I might have mispronounced your name, but if you can click the mic at the top of your screen and come off mute, you may ask your question. All right. Mary, I'm going to keep you off. You can still come off mute. I'm unable to unmute you for you, but if you still have a question to be asked, I still see your hand up, but if you still have a question to be asked, feel free to come off mute at any point and ask that as long as we're in the Q&A session. I don't see any other hands up, but if there are other questions out there, okay, we've got Edward Richards. Thank you. Was that on purpose or did that? Okay. There we go, Edward. I am going to allow your mic. You can now come off mute and ask your question.
First and foremost, thank you so much for this session. Everything's been really helpful. But I wanted to ask, and with Senior Connections, and we are planning to apply again for supporting older adults in Richmond City. So my question is about the addendum. So I see a couple of attachments, but on the actual addendum, it does not list any of the other attachments but A. So would you recommend for me to continue to do the additional attachments in the full application for somebody applying for the first time, or should I just focus on A since we've kind of already been vetted at some point in the past? So I wanted some clarity on that.
You got it. The whole point of this is to make it easier for you and easier for us. So that if you are currently in contract with us, that means like, unless something dramatic has changed in the past, really, what, 3 months, LaSharn, you're good. And so, yeah, you don't need to submit anything extra. The reason why we offer the addendum is because we know that for current grantees, we don't need to make this a really laborious process as long as you're applying for the same funding. Like you're asking for funding for the same project, so that we've already evaluated that in the last year. And if you've already submitted all of that supplementary documentation. So if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to Daphne, but I think just stick to what's in that addendum and you should be set.
And one last thing, this is maybe a silly question, but I heard you saying maybe tie what current what literature the city has maybe put out in reference to like a project area. So again, for like older adults, is there a particular place on the city's website that has those things like Reggie's blog or something like that? Or
that's a good question. I was more articulating, so like the spirit behind my sharing that is to say, if for instance, we're talking about things that are listed in the equity agenda that has been approved by council, but it isn't spelled out in this application, it's absolutely a city priority. It needs to fit in one of these broader priority areas. But if you can call on something else. It is not a requirement to be part of your application that you're citing like statements by city leaders that this is something that's important. It's more that, I think Lynn brought up a good point, which is to say, like, is it housing insecure? Is it just homelessness services? And she can probably point to the equity agenda that says that the city's committed to expanding its stock of affordable housing to be able to articulate that this is a city priority. So that's more of my point, is to say, this document has guiding priority areas that are our 3 funding categories. The specific details, feel free to call on other things that City Council has approved and that are formal on the city website and things like that. But don't spend a ton of time like Googling keywords and city leader names. Like that's not going to help or harm you. Like I just don't want to waste your time. I just want to name that there are multiple ways to identify that something's a priority. And if you feel like you want to call on those, we welcome you to do that.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Even. Thank you so much, LaSharn.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to disable your mic, Edward, and I'm going to move on to Cindy Hutchison. So Cindy, your mic is now active. You can unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, great. Thank you for this webinar today. I have a quick question about the letter of support from RPS. We have, do I need to, did I understand that I need to have an annual letter of support, or we are very much entrenched with Richmond Public Schools and have an MOU with them and would be continuing the current project? It's a pretty quick turnaround. That's why I just want to make sure.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And if you have an active letter of support, this is something that if you have an active MOU,
yes, we do.
You can absolutely just submit the MOU. So thank you for asking that again. I'm sure there's folks on the line who have a similar question.
Yeah.
We need basically an indication that RPS is supportive of your work. If you have an MOU, awesome. I should have clarified this when I went through that slide. This is more for folks who are running a program that does not have an MOU, might be maybe interested in partnering with RPS, or has a plan to use RPS facilities or fields to run a program, but hasn't actually done this in concert with RPS to date or received funding from us for this purpose. But yes, Cindy, to your point, any of that partnership documentation is helpful. So submit your MOU with your application, but you don't need to turn this around into a new letter of support.
Right. Thank you so much, because I thought
absolutely
to do it, and it's the week before Christmas.
Well, and I will get a call from the superintendent's office asking why I'm crazy. So I appreciate you asking that question.
Great. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. So Cindy, I'm disabling your microphone, and then I am now going to turn to Rodney Williams. I'm allowing your mic. You can come off mute and ask your question.
Hi guys. So I am with the Capital Region Small Business Development Center. So we do free of cost business advising to try to get clients to impact goals like jobs created, new business starts, stuff like that, access to capital. Mm-hmm. And we get federal dollars to do that, as well as state and local government dollars to do that. So in looking at this, would we fit into that quasi-government kind of bracket? Because I don't necessarily see anything else that would fit our organization.
That's a really good question, Rodney, and I actually would invite you to email me. I'm going to add my email address right on this slide right now. I'm just going to put it in all caps so y'all can see it, because I need to. I believe we have funding opportunities that would be relevant for your purpose, but it wouldn't be through this category. I need to reach out to me. I will ask the right people in City Hall. I imagine it would come from the Department of Economic Development or through the Economic Development Authority versus Human Services. But send it over and I will figure out who is the right place to direct, or what funding opportunity I can connect you to. Because to your point, it doesn't exactly fit what we've got for Human Services. Or when we talk about quasi-governmental, we really are thinking about not independent organizations that receive public funding, but really organizations so an example of a quasi-governmental organization is Venture Richmond, which was launched in partnership with the city to do event promotion and space maintenance and tourism. So it's literally quasi-governmental in that it is part of city government as an extension. Your organization sounds like it's not a perfect fit for what we've got in this opportunity, but I would love to connect with you over email and put you in touch with relevant folks, colleagues of ours across City Hall, who can actually work with you on the project that you're working on, which is absolutely important and vital, particularly post-pandemic, but not a great fit for this funding opportunity. So I hope you email me and we'll follow up from there.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Okay. Want to name that Edward, Cindy, and Rodney, your hands are still up. So if you have another question, that's totally fine. And I will allow you to speak again. But if you don't have another question, make sure you take your hands down so that I don't get confused, because I will get confused. Anybody else with questions? Okay, wait, Cindy, I see your hand still up, so I will allow your mic. Feel free to come off mute and ask another question.
I'm sorry, I don't have.
No problem. No worries. That's why I said, keep your hand up if you need a question answered. That's fine.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Okay. So you don't have another question. All right, great. All right, so Lynn, I will allow your mic. I saw your hand go back up. you can come off mute and ask a question.
Yeah, I do have one more question about the automatic email, or excuse me, the email of confirmation. Is that an automatic email? I'm just wondering if we need to be at the ready with a printed copy if we get it in on the 16th and realize we didn't have the email confirmation.
So it's not automatic. It's a person actually in the budget office mans that email. Several people might have access. So as soon as they receive it, it might not be immediately, you know, it might be an hour or so. I wouldn't wait until the 16th to submit it because that's what happened last year. It got bogged up, you know, they didn't get a confirmation. So I would try to submit it electronically prior to the 16th. If you have to wait to the 16th, I would have a copy in hand to drop off downstairs. So it's not as soon as you get it, it's an automatic email because there's a person that actually has to go in and respond to each email and make sure they can open up the file. So budget office is pretty great about responding pretty quickly, but it might not be, you know, it could be 3:30 and 4 o'clock is the deadline. You might not get it. A confirmation email, even though we might receive it, if that makes sense. So I would not wait until the last minute. Some people, they call, they resubmitted it, we received it, some we didn't. So if you don't receive a confirmation email, I would just have a hard copy ready to drop off. So I would not wait until Friday is what I'm suggesting.
That's great advice.
So hopefully that answered your question. I don't, you know, it could be 3:30 and they might respond at 4, say we got it. You might be en route here. I just wouldn't wait until 3 o'clock on Friday to try to submit it.
Absolutely.
And the rationale there is that even if we were to set up like an automated response to say like, thank you for sending an email to this email address, we've had trouble with the city email server processing some attachments occasionally. So
Right.
we might receive an email, but have a corrupted attachment. So we have actual human beings monitoring that inbox to be able to validate that your application has been submitted and is like readable, legible for
Right.
us, and not just like, you know, that attachment has made it through. So that's why we don't just have an automatic thing, because the email might get delivered, right? But we might not be able to open that file or things like that. This is us trying to add, you know, backstops against technology failure, if that makes sense.
Thank you for even saying that, because that is correct, that we cannot open some of the files. That has been an issue. So thank you for adding that.
Yeah. And in that case, you might get an email back from the budget team that says, hey, we received your email. We tried to open this file. It's not opening. Can you resend, or can you present this in hard copy? So just be aware that there are a variety of scenarios that might come. 90% of the time, we're going to get your application. It's going to be totally fine. But we just want to make sure you're aware of the potential contingencies. But
and
thanks,
Eva,
Lynn.
let me add one more thing also. In your application, there is that particular email inbox for your application. Please do not send it if you're a repeat grantee to the non-departmental email, because it won't be monitored through that email inbox. So please use the email that is listed on the application. Do not send it to me, Dominique, Eva, anybody else on the team, because budget, they timestamp it and it's all recorded what agency applied, what time, and it's listed and it's put into a category. So if it goes to any other inbox, we cannot guarantee that it will go to that budget inbox in a timely manner. So please make sure you're using the right email address for your application, please.
Thank you, LaSharn. Well, I see no more hands. I will give you all another couple seconds to raise a hand if you got a question, but please know if you need assistance during the application process, I'm going to delete my email because I don't want to confuse people. That's a very specific offer. I don't have capacity to help everybody, unfortunately. I wish I could. But first, helpful links. The budget website is www.rva.gov/budget-and-strategic-planning. If you check out that, you can see the past budgets. You can see you can see how this is organized. It's more of like an FYI. You're going to want to click through to the forms and links page. That said, Our Office of Strategic Communications and Citizen Engagement is going to continue to be pushing this out. So you will have, it should already be on social. It should already be, out in the ether. So feel free to click through on those. And then biggest question is if you need help during the application process, please contact Daphne Bolitas, and her email address is right here, daphne.bolitas@rba.gov, and her phone number is 804-646-0752. Again, that's 804-646-0752. Historically, LaSharn has managed questions during the process. LaSharn is very busy and is really working hard on supporting our this year grantees. And so Daphne's going to be fielding all application questions. You will get to, get close to LaSharn again, but after awards are made, she will then be available to you. But between now and application deadline, Daphne's your point of contact. Cindy, I see you one more time. I'm going to disable your mic. I'm going to allow your mic and you can come off mute and ask your question.
Quick question. Did I understand you will be sending this presentation to us in email?
It will be available for download on the budget website. So we're not going to be, we're not going to be emailing the attendees, but we are going to post the file to the website with where the non-departmental application is posted.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to disable your mic, and then Coach Nikki. Oh, are you still there? Let me see. No, okay. Any other questions? Okay, friends, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for your interest in our community grants process. I just want to reiterate, we are so grateful for all the work that you do every single day for the residents of the city of Richmond. We really do mean it when we say we have huge goals, aspirational visions for what this place means and will be for folks who live here, and that so that every resident has the opportunity to thrive in Richmond. And truly, we cannot do that and accomplish that without you. So thank you, and recognize as well that, like I said before, there are always more qualified applications than we are able to fund. And so if you are not funded this year, that does not mean that we don't want to partner with you or work with you in any way. We often are bound by a lot of other constraints than just, purely those who are running good programs and could offer something to our community. So again, thank you so very much. Good luck with the application. Please don't be a stranger. And if you need assistance, Daphne is there to help. So have great days and a good rest of your week. And if I don't talk to you before then, a good holiday and new year. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.